They came after your food. They came after your travel. They came after your car. They came after your house. And now they want man's best friend. People often miscalculate the impact of quote unquote climate choices, like owning a dog.
Disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. They came after your food. They came after your travel. They came after your car. They came after your house. And now they want man's best friend. This sounds like a Disney tale. This sounds like a fantasy, but it's actually occurring, folks. From the CBC. This is a legit article that was published. People often miscalculate the impact of quote-unquote climate choices, like owning a dog, study says. Owning a dog, avoiding plane flights among most important for climate and were among the most underestimated. So, owning a pet that you value as a family member is considered dangerous to the climate, according to the so-called experts lecturing you about choices, climate choices. It's dangerous for you to have a pet. It's dangerous for you to have a home. It's dangerous for you to live an average life and just trying to survive this crazy world, but not for the billionaire class that have multiple private jets, that go from conference to conference around the world, that drive around in gas-guzzling motorcades, the ones that own huge mansions on oceanfront. It's never about their choices, but it's always about the choices of you. You're the one. You guys have to smarten up. It sounds like the start of a Barack Obama speech. You got to pull your pants up. Pull your pants up. You can't have air conditioning. So this is a legit article, folks. This is a legit article. I can't believe this is happening. It turns out many people aren't great at identifying which personal decisions contribute most to climate change. Really? Really? You mean we're not compliant to the billionaire hypocrites that scream the loudest about climate change, even though they're the ones that contribute the most in emissions, the most danger to the environment, to life on this earth? And some of the ones that may come as a surprise. A study recently published by the National Academy of Sciences found that when asked to rank actions such as swapping a car that uses gasoline for an electric one, carpooling, or reducing food waste, participants from a U.S. cohort weren't very accurate when assessing how much those actions contribute to climate change, which is caused mostly by the release of greenhouse gases that happen when fuels like gasoline, oil, and coal are burned. People overassign impact to actually pretty low impact actions such as recycling and underestimate the actual carbon impact of behaviors much more carbon intense, like flying or eating meat. That's why the billionaires are telling you to not travel, not go around to places that you're restricted from where you're allowed to roam and move, and are telling you that bugs have better protein and are better for you than actual meat, which is the complete opposite. Complete opposite. Said Medelia, I can't even say that. Report co-author, professor of environmental sciences, yada, yada, yada. The top 3 individual actions that help the climate, including avoiding plane flights, choosing not to get a dog. That's apparently what they're saying. Do not get an animal. Do not get a pet. Because apparently dog farts are now the big worry. Is that it? It's so insane. It's so insane to have these articles lecture us about what choices we should be making when it comes to the impact of the planet But yet there's never, ever, ever, hardly any articles putting the climate choice lecture to the billionaire class. That, hey, you guys at the top there screaming the loudest about climate change and the environment, maybe you should be changing your ways. Maybe you should give up your mansions. Maybe you should give up your private jets. Maybe you should stop eating filet mignon and caviar every night. Maybe you should reconsider your choices. But no, it's rules for thee, but not for me. That's what it is. And using renewable electricity were also the three that participants underestimate the most. Meanwhile, the lowest impact actions were changing to the most efficient appliances and swapping out light bulbs, recycling, and using less energy on washing clothes. Those were three of the top four overestimated actions in the report. She said marketing focuses on electricity. Said marketing focuses more on recycling and using energy efficient light than on why flights or dog adoption are relatively bad for the climate. So participants were more likely to give those actions more weight. How the human brain is wired also plays a role. What, our brains are now bad for the planet? Is that what they're saying? You could see the bottle being recycled. That's visible. Whereas carbon emissions, that's invisible to the human eye. So that's why we don't associate emissions with flying. Said, again, I'm not going to even try to pronounce these names, who teaches psychology and sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Zio added, it's easier to bring actions to mind when we do more often. Recycling is almost a daily action, whereas flying is less frequent. It's less discussed, she said. As a result, people give a higher psychology way to recycling. Of course, there's a lot of misleading information. For example, some companies tout the recycling they do while not telling the public about pollution that comes from their overall operations. There's been a lot of deliberate confusion out there to support policies that are really out of date, said Brenda Again, I can't pronounce any of these names. It's crazy. A climate scientist with the nonprofit union of concerned scientists. So this is what they claim why dogs are now on this list. Get this. Dogs are big meat eaters, and meat is a significant contributor to climate change. That's why you can't have a pet. That's why you can't have a furry loved one for your family. A loyal companion. Because your dog eats meat. If I train my dog to be a vegetarian, would that be okay for these idiots? Would that be okay for the climate zealots? Is that okay? If I train my dog to not be an animal, an animal that survived generation after generation. That is because many of the farm animals, which will become food, release methane, a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. Beef is especially impactful, in part because around the world, cattle are often raised on land that was illegally deforested. Since trees absorbs carbon dioxide, the most abundant greenhouse gases, cutting them into the raised cattle is a double whammy. People just don't associate pets with carbon emissions. That link is not clear in people's minds. So they claim that because dogs have a more carnivorous diet than average humans, that we have to get rid of dogs. We can't have pets because of their diets being contributed to cows, and cows are creating methane. But again, no talk about the mass amounts of private jets, no talk about how they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, causing the biggest natural disaster to the oceans in that area between Russia and Europe. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about warfare, how we're using ammunition that's blowing up regions and causing everything from uranium to radiology and just exploding in these areas. We don't talk about that. None of those choices matter. But you having a pet, you eating meat, you having personal choice on what car you're allowed to drive, where you're allowed to travel, that's what's concerning. That's what's concerning to these people. How crazy it is. And the people, again, the people who scream the loudest about this are the biggest hypocrites. So here's concerned citizen. Why don't they talk about planting trees? Why isn't Bill Gates, the largest private landowner in the U.S., planting trees like crazy? That's a good question. That's a climate choice. I'd be asking someone like Bill Gates, hey, you care so much about carbon dioxide, you care so much about greenhouse gases, why aren't you planting trees? Why is there no initiative in your Bill and Melinda Gates coalition in planting trees? Well, here's Whitney Webb to explain why Bill Gates would never actually plant trees and why he's the biggest hypocrite when it comes to the climate crisis.
Why don't they talk about planting trees? Why isn't Bill Gates the largest, like private landowner in the U.S. now planting trees like crazy if he's so worried about carbon dioxide? He poo-poos the whole idea of planting trees as a way to combat climate change. It's just carbon markets and going to electric vehicles and all of this stuff. But electric vehicles necessitates mass mining, and a lot of that mining is in places that use child labor, or it's going to be so environmentally destructive you totally destroy the developing world, which these people on the left supposedly want to protect. You're going to totally destroy the environment. But really, what it's about is controlling how much energy people can use, and if you control how much energy a household can use, you can control their economic activity. You also control how big their family can get.
So that's the game there. That's the game. It's about control. It's about when you grasp the control of how much electricity people use, how much water people can use. That's what all this is leading to. That's what all this is leading to. And that's why they're developing at this rate the process of why we need a digital ID, why we need to be tracked, surveilled, and monitored, why we need to use AI technology, which is going at an alarming rate, not just to replace workers in factories and sectors in North America and around the world, but to monitor and surveil people's actions and decide by the AI, by the billionaire class, what people are allowed to do. If they're allowed to drive somewhere, what food they're allowed to purchase, what kind of families they're allowed to have. Are they allowed to have many kids or no kids? So all this leads to control. All this leads to barbaric control. And that's why the CBC, being state media in this country, brought to you by the Canadian government, brought to you by nefarious lobbyists that purposely propagandize people in this matter, want to go after your puppies, want to go after dogs, instead of stopping billionaires like Bill Gates who don't even believe in tree planting. The natural occurring carbon dioxide filter that has reduced carbon significantly for over centuries, the thing that we need to produce oxygen for us to breathe. He doesn't believe in trees. Mr. Fancy Pants, Mr. Climate Scientist, the guy who never finished college. He doesn't believe in planting trees, but he does believe in capitalizing off a problem we can fearmonger people on.
It's fear driven to get people to accept policies they otherwise wouldn't accept because they're told this cataclysmic event is just down the line. And trust us, again, is the conclusion of that. There's people that agree with the narrative about climate change, and there's people that don't. And I'm not trying to really get in that space when I talk about this stuff. I'm trying to point out that the solutions are coming mostly from Wall Street. And then you have people like Larry Fink of BlackRock and Michael Bloomberg and Mark Carney coming together in something like GFAN saying, why don't we give Wall Street direct control of the IMF and the World Bank for climate change? You know,
right.
How can anyone on the left that's worried about climate change sign up on that?
And she threw in Mark Carney's name in that because Mark Carney has had years working with Brookfield. His whole initiative is to have net zero policies on everything. Everything. From finances to exports to how we govern specific towns and cities across the country. This was the entire agenda of Mark Carney. And that's being fully implemented as we're speaking, which is why the CBC is lecturing you about owning puppy dogs, but not looking at the obvious hypocrisy coming out of these individuals. The people that fly around on private jets are lecturing you about the solutions to climate change, even though they don't know anything about the climate more or less than I do, than anyone else does. I know that trees are beneficial. I know that agriculture is actually very sustainable. But they want to tell you otherwise. They want to tell you that plant-based meat, factories are beneficial. They want to tell you you're not allowed to travel, but I'll do the traveling for you. They're the biggest hypocrites ever that are telling you about climate choices. But there's never any lectures to them. No accountability. No, nothing against their choices and their impact on the climate. So, here, for example, this is from Government EXE is Corrupt. This is Mark Carney's mission. A net zero economy with individual carbon footprint trackers, CBDCs, that's digital-based currencies, and a social credit system. So, this is where they want to put digital IDs onto people that are going to track, monitor, surveil, and record the data of individuals and their lifestyles. That's going to be tracked and monitored by the government to then put these harsh authoritarian measures onto individuals that violate these carbon credits, that don't contribute to a net zero economy, which is absolutely insane. You can't have a net zero economy. That's ridiculous. But this is from the World Economic Forum that Mark Carney was a contributor to. This is them explaining to this for the entire world, not just Canada.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker.
That is, CBDC can allow
an individual carbon footprint tracker. It is going to be installed onto you. They're going to monitor everything you do, everything you consume, everything you're watching, everything you're eating, everything. To be sent off to these private equity firms that run these apps, and they get to decide your life. They get to decide your livelihood. To decide if it's good for the climate or not. The biggest hypocrites. The people that are flying on private jets to these conferences.
government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized.
Is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that.
I didn't realize Augustus Gloop was part of the conference there. We will control the climate after I finish eating this chocolate from a river. Jeez. Oh my God. That's just that. It's insane. It's insane. Having these conferences discussing people's climate choices, having publications tell you about having a dog is so alarming these days. Even though civilization has been having dogs and pets and having animals accompany them since the dawning of civilization. You go back to like ancient Egypt, had cats and dogs. You look at ancient societies, they had pets. But all of a sudden, now it's such an alarming rate because, oh God, they eat meat. And somehow cows are producing farts that contain methane that's causing climate change. I better go on my private jet, go all the way to the other side of the world, and warn people. While eating filet mignon and caviar. And laughing behind closed doors at how idiotic this all sounds. And how people, I can't believe some people are actually buying it. And again, just like what Whitney Webb said earlier, and just what I'm saying here, I'm not detesting. This is not about whether climate change exists or not. This is about the people we're relying on solutions for are the biggest hypocrites. And that if you actually want to know about the planet, you actually want to know about the environment and the impacts and what we can be doing, do not trust people at Davos. Do not trust people like politicians. Do not trust any of these people. But you can listen to farmers. You can listen to agricultural experts. Why? Because the climate is their business. If there's frequent droughts that are happening, or if there's flooding occurring, or if they don't have the proper soil to grow vegetation, that's alarming to them. That's why they're very concerned about the climate. So instead of demonizing farmers, like they've been doing in the Netherlands and they do in this country, obviously, instead of demonizing them for the supposed wrongful impacts on the environment, maybe we should be listening to them. Maybe we should be encouraging them. Maybe we should be encouraging more vegetation. That carbon would actually be sucked in by the plants by photosynthesis and produce more oxygen. That's basic biology. That's like stuff I learned from first grade. But yet none of these people ever address. Bill Gates doesn't believe in planting trees. He doesn't believe that it's useful. But it's okay to build a monstrosity that sucks in carbon and doesn't produce anything, doesn't actually do any benefit to the country, to the planet as a whole. It's so sick. It's so sick and awful that's happening. And it's also the same people, just to remind people, that are cutting down the Amazon rainforest. Remember how everyone was alarmed about this? How we're deforesting the Amazon rainforest and people were up in arms and there was protests, there was people campaigning again. Well, the people that screamed the loudest about climate change are allowing this to happen. Massive stretch of Amazon rainforest destroyed for upcoming COP30 climate summit for a 4-lane highway. Quote, this is a loss. That's from the New York Post. So, in order to have a climate summit, to be worried about climate change, they're destroying a portion of the Amazon rainforest, a huge portion of this rainforest, to build a superhighway. That's counterproductive. Doesn't it sound like that? Doesn't it sound counterproductive? You're destroying the rainforest, cutting down trees, killing off livelihood, killing off the biodiversity in a precious land like the Amazon to build a superhighway to a conference center to talk about the climate. It's sick. It really is sick. These people are monsters. These people are greedy, asshole, hypocritical monsters. And again, this is not whether or not climate change exists. That's its own separate conversation. This is about the people that are coming up with these heinous solutions, the ones that are regulating and legislating against us for these net zero policies that no one asked for, that no one is cheering for, but is going to cause devastation to large amounts of people. These people that are coming up with the solutions to climate change are the biggest contributors to climate change. They're the ones that are putting out the most emissions. They're the ones that their choices need to be examined. They're the ones that need to be held under the microscope and examined for what they're causing climate change. When are we going to know about their carbon footprints? That's a question I would like to know. When do I get to see Bill Gates' carbon impact, or Mark Carney's, or Al Gore's, or John Kerry's? You know, any of these hypocritical monsters that lecture you about your choices. You are the problem. You guys are the problem, not me. Rules for thee, but not for me. But maybe we should get a private jet to send Barack Obama back to Africa and tell them that they can't have air conditioning because it's going to wreck his, 48-acre estate on Martha's Vineyard. The oceans are going to rise up and it's going to devastate people. That's why I'm buying up more oceanfront properties. Biggest lying hypocrites known to mankind. And like I said, you want to know about nature, you want to know about the environment, go talk to people that directly deal with nature. Go talk to the people that actually engage in the real world, that actually know about the climate, that their business, their livelihoods rely on. That's why farmers should be the top of the list. Farmers. Not be demonized for their livestock, not be demonized, but actually celebrated for their contribution to helping the climate by producing more crops, by producing more agriculture. And by the way, NASA has done studies to prove that all this extra carbon in the atmosphere is greening the atmosphere. There's actually more vegetation. There's more greening happening. Trees are coming back to life because carbon is beneficial. Carbon is a necessity for life on Earth. We're carbon-based organisms, for God's sakes. We need carbon to survive. So all these people that are telling you that carbon-based climate change is such a harsh concern that you have to give up your dogs, you have to cancel your flights, are the biggest monsters on the face of the earth and should not be listened to or trusted at any point in turn when it comes to climate change and when it comes to the environment as a whole.